The anvil of the sun hammered the Arizona territory into a flat, shimmering sheet of heat. Dust, fine as milled flour, coated everything, turning the gray-green sage to a uniform dun. Thomas McCrae felt the grit in his teeth, a permanent seasoning for the back of his throat. He worked with his head down, his movements economical, saving what little energy the oppressive August air allowed. He was mending the southern fence line, a task that was never finished, only paused. The cottonwood posts, driven deep into the baked earth, were always rotting at the ground or being worried loose by lean cattle. He worked alone. He always worked alone. His ranch, if one could call the squat sod cabin in the Leaning Corral a ranch, sat in a shallow bowl of the plains, miles from the nearest neighbor, and 10 times that from the cluster of buildings they called Tucson. The land was his inheritance, a bitter one, bequeathed by the graves of his mother, his father, and his younger sister, marked by 3 simple wooden crosses just east of the cabin. They had been dead for 15 years, killed in a Tonto raid that had swept through this small settlement when he was just a boy of 12. He had survived only because he'd been hiding in the dry well. A game of hide-and-seek turned into a lifetime of haunting. Now, at 27, Thomas was a man shaped by that silence and that shadow. He was tall and broad-shouldered from the relentless labor, but he moved with a compressed energy, as if always trying to take up less space. His face, burned dark by the sun, was quiet. When he had to ride to the trading post for salt, flour, and cartridges, a trip he postponed until his supplies were dangerously low, he was a creature of awkward angles and mumbled half-words. He would stand by the counter, eyes fixed on the cracker barrel, feeling the stares of the other ranchers and prospectors. He knew what they thought. The quiet McCrae, the one who lived with ghosts. They spoke of him in low tones, a man touched by tragedy, perhaps touched by madness. He would gather his things, nod once to the storekeep, and be gone, his mule kicking up a plume of dust that signaled his retreat back to the only company he could bear, the wind, the cattle, and the memories. He did not trust people. People brought noise, and noise brought pain. They brought expectations he could not meet and questions he would not answer. His world was the complaining creak of the windmill, the lowing of his 20-odd head of longhorn, the rustle of the dry grasses. It was a simple, brutal liturgy of survival, and it was enough. Or so he told himself. In the distance, the sky was changing. The brilliant, punishing blue was bruising to a deep, heavy purple in the southeast. The monsoon winds were gathering. A low, electric hum seemed to rise from the ground, a promise of violence and relief. The air grew thick, still, and expectant. Thomas wiped the sweat from his forehead with a dusty forearm and squinted at the horizon. The coming storm made him uneasy. It stirred the air, and it stirred the past. He was about to gather his tools when a flicker of movement near the dry arroyo caught his eye. It was not a cow. It was too low, too fluid. He had lost a calf to a coyote just 3 nights prior. He'd found the remains, a grim scattering of bones picked clean. He'd set a trap, but the animal was too cunning. Now, he saw it, a flash of gray-brown fur, a limping gait. It was wounded, maybe from the trap, maybe from a rattlesnake. A wounded animal was a desperate animal. It would be back. Thomas left his post-hole digger and wire spool where they lay and walked back to his horse, a stoic buckskin mare that watched him with indifferent eyes. He pulled his rifle from the saddle scabbard. The Winchester felt heavy and familiar in his hands, an extension of his own guarded nature. He did not like killing, but he understood the necessity. He began to track the coyote, his boots making almost no sound on the hard-packed earth. He followed the sparse trail of blood and the telltale drag of the animal's injured leg for nearly a mile, toward the rocky outcrops that marked the western edge of his property. This was the borderland, where his small claim on the world softened into the true wilderness, a place of red rock and mesquite thickets that belonged to no one, or perhaps to everyone he had been taught to fear. He crested a small rise, his eyes scanning the jumble of boulders ahead. The coyote was gone, vanished into the landscape. But something else was there, a person, Thomas froze. His heart gave a single, hard kick against his ribs. It was a woman, standing perfectly still beside a tall shaft of saguaro. Not 50 yards away, she was Apache. His blood ran cold. The old fear, the one that lived in the bottom of the dry well with him, seized his throat. His first instinct was to drop, to seek cover, to bring the rifle to bear. His thumb moved automatically, clicking the hammer to full cock. The sound was terribly loud in the charged air. But the woman did not move. She was not hiding. She was not armed, at least not with a rifle. She was simply watching him. He stared, his mind racing. This was not the behavior of a raider. A raider would be hidden or charging. This was something else, something he had no frame for. She was dressed in a worn buckskin dress, fringed and decorated with simple beadwork that had lost some of its color. Her black hair was parted in the middle and tied back, stark against the lines of her face. She was lean, as if she had missed many meals, but she stood with a straight-backed posture that was anything but weak. She was alone. He scanned the ridges, the rocks, the shadows. Nothing. No glint of steel, no hidden horses. Just this woman, the waiting sky, and the silent, throbbing hum of the coming storm. Then, she did the last thing he expected. She took a step toward him. "That's far enough," Thomas said. His voice came out rough, a dry croak he barely recognized. His rifle was half raised, pointed at the ground between them. The woman stopped. She looked at the rifle, then back at his face. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of carved, placid features. But her eyes, they were old, older than the land, it seemed, and filled with a darkness that mirrored the clouds above. "You are Thomas McCrae," she said. The sound of her voice was another shock. It was not the guttural dialect he had heard shouted during the raid. Her English was clear, the words precise, almost educated, though spoken with a low, measured cadence. Thomas's suspicion ratcheted higher. An Apache who knew his name, who spoke like a white woman. This had to be a trick, a lure. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want?" "My name is Nayeli," she said, as simply as stating the color of the sky. She took another slow, deliberate step. "I said stay put," Thomas barked, the rifle coming up another few inches. Panic was making his palms sweat. He was not a man of violence, not truly. He was a man of fear, and fear was a dangerous thing. Nayeli stopped again. She held her hands out slightly from her sides, palms open, showing she held no weapon. "I am not here to harm you. I am here to ask for something." "I've got nothing for you," Thomas said, his eyes darting back to the ridges. "No food, no horses. This is my land. You turn around and leave." "I do not want your food," Nayeli said. The wind was picking up, lifting strands of her hair and flattening the dry grass. It whistled softly in the rocks. "I do not want your horses, or your land." Thomas waited. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind and the frantic hammering in his own chest. He felt exposed, foolish, a player in a scene he did not understand. She met his gaze directly. The unreadable mask of her face held firm, but her eyes, when he looked closely, were awash in a profound, unspeakable hurt. It was an expression he knew. He saw it in the cracked piece of mirror he shaved in every morning. "I need something from you," she said again, her voice steady against the rising wind. "What?" he finally pressed, exasperated and afraid. "What is it you want?" Nayeli held his gaze for a long moment, as if measuring his soul, or perhaps her own resolve. "I want a child," she said. The words dropped into the air and seemed to stop the world. Thomas stared. The wind, the storm, the fear, it all receded, replaced by a deafening, ringing incomprehension. "What?" he whispered. "I want a child," she repeated, no louder, no softer. "From you." Thomas's mind staggered, trying to find purchase on the sheer absurdity of the statement. A trick. It had to be a trick. But what kind? A distraction? Was she mad? He looked at her, truly looked. She did not seem mad. She seemed weighted, grounded by a sorrow so immense it had burned away everything else. You You're crazy, he stammered, lowering the rifle slightly in his confusion. That's a sin. That's madness. It is not madness, she said. It is a necessity. I do not ask for a husband. I do not ask for your help or your protection. I ask for this one thing. A child. Thomas felt a flush of heat rise up his neck, a mixture of shame and anger. Was she mocking him? Did she know? Did she know he was the haunted recluse? The man who had never been with a woman, who barely knew how to speak to one. Why me? He choked out. Why come here, saying that? You are alone, she said, her voice flat, stating a simple fact. And I am alone. You have no one. I have no one. That's no answer, he snapped. I don't know you. You're Apache. The word felt like a betrayal in his mouth, the summation of all his fear. For the first time, her expression flickered. A deep, cold pain passed over her features. Yes, I am, and you're white. It does not matter. The blood does not matter. It matters to me, he said, his voice hard. He raised the rifle again. This is a trick. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over. You get off my land, now, before this storm hits, or before I make you. He expected her to argue, to plead, or to finally reveal the threat. She did none of those things. She simply held his gaze for one more second, the hurt in her eyes so profound it almost buckled his knees. It was a bottomless well of loss. Then, the mask returned. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if he had only confirmed something she already knew. I will go, she said. She turned with a quiet, devastating dignity and began to walk away, not back toward the wilderness she had come from, but parallel to his fence line, moving with a steady, unhurried pace. She did not look back. Thomas stood there, his rifle heavy in his grasp, his body trembling. He watched her walk until her form was small against the darkening horizon. The first fat drops of rain, cold and heavy, began to strike the dust around him, each one kicking up a tiny puff of powder. The thunder grumbled, a low, long growl from the belly of the sky. He had refused. He had driven her off. He had done the sensible thing. The only thing. He lowered the rifle, his breathing ragged. He felt no relief. He only felt the crushing weight of the silence she had left behind, and the burning image of her eyes. He thought it was a trick. He thought it was madness. But as the rain began to fall in earnest, stinging his sun-baked skin, he could not escape the terrifying, confusing feeling that he had just refused the first truly human thing that had reached for him in 15 years. The encounter lingered. It clung to him like the mud that now caked his boots. The monsoon broke that night, a deluge of sheeting rain and cracking lightning that turned his dry arroyo into a churning, muddy river. For 2 days, the world was water and noise, a violent cleansing that kept him trapped inside the small, damp cabin. He tried to busy himself. He rewrapped the handle of his axe. He cleaned his rifle until the mechanism gleamed. He sat by his small, smoky fire, listening to the roar of the storm. But his mind was not on his chores. It was on her. I want a child. The request was an email that would not go out. It was preposterous. It was dangerous. The settlers in Tucson, the ranchers he avoided, spoke of the Apache with a venom reserved for rattlesnakes and plague. To be associated with one was ruin. To do what she had asked, that was a death sentence. They would lynch him, or the army would. He told himself this, pacing the 3 steps from his cot to his fireplace. He was right to refuse. He was right to be suspicious. She was probably gone, washed away by the storm, or miles away, having moved on to try her desperate, insane plea on some other lonely fool. On the 3rd day, the storm passed. The sky was scrubbed clean, a brilliant, piercing blue. The air was cool and smelled of wet creosote and damp earth. The world felt new. Thomas ventured out, his boots sinking into the soft ground, to check on his cattle and the state of his fences. He was half a mile from the cabin when he saw her. She was standing on the same ridge where he had first seen her. She was not close enough to speak to, but close enough to be seen. a dark, solitary figure against the bright morning sky. His heart stopped, then restarted with a heavy, leaden beat. She was not gone. She was watching. He stopped his horse and stared at her for a long minute. She did not move. She did not wave. She did not approach. She just stood there, a silent sentinel. Thomas kicked his horse, turning it abruptly, and rode in the opposite direction, toward his cattle. He worked all day with a frantic, angry energy, repairing a section of fence the flash flood had torn down. He refused to look toward the ridge. He refused to acknowledge her, but he could feel her. He could feel her eyes on his back, a pressure as real as the sun on his neck. When the sun began to dip, painting the wet landscape in hues of orange and violet, he rode home. He glanced toward the ridge. She was gone. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, a small measure of relief. It had been a fluke. She was leaving, but the next morning, she was there again. This time, closer. She was sitting on a boulder near the dry creek bed, now slick with residual mud. She was perhaps 300 yards from his cabin, still watching, still waiting. He got his rifle and laid it across the windowsill as he made his meager breakfast of coffee and stale biscuits. He watched her. She did not move. She just sat, staring toward his cabin. "What do you want?" he muttered to the empty room. "What in God's name do you want from me?" This continued for 3 more days, every morning. She was there, a different spot each time, but always at the edge of his land, just within sight. A silent, patient siege. She made no fire. She made no camp. He did not know where she slept or what she ate. She was just there. His defenses, the high, thick walls of isolation he had built for 15 years, were beginning to crack. The raid had been noise and fire and screaming. This was the opposite. It was a silence, a stillness, a presence that demanded nothing and yet consumed his every thought. He was terrified of her. He was angered by her, and, in a deep, secret part of himself he had not visited since he was a child, he was profoundly, agonizingly confused. He was the man who trusted no one. He was the man who lived with ghosts. He did not know that he was, at last, being haunted by a living one. The siege of silence lasted a week. It became a part of his landscape, as fixed as the squat mesquite trees and the distant, saw-toothed mountains. Each morning, Thomas McCrae would wake, his first act not to check the fire or the sky, but to look out his one dusty window, and she would be there. Naily, a little closer each day, until she was sitting on the low stone wall of his failed garden, a place his mother had tried to grow beans before the land and the grief claimed her. He tried to ignore her. He fed his horse. He oiled his tack. He patched a hole in his sod roof. But her presence was a hook, pulling his attention, unraveling the tight, protective knot of his solitude. He was a man drowning in a quiet, dry ocean of loneliness, and she was the only other person on the shore. He found himself growing angry, not just at her, but at the sheer, maddening persistence of her, the way her stillness forced him to feel. On the 8th day, she broke the pattern. He was in the corral, trying to reset the gatepost that the flood had loosened, his back aching, his hands raw. He was using a length of log as a lever, grunting, the post refusing to budge from the thick mud. He heard a sound behind him, the soft scrape of a boot on stone. He spun around, his hand dropping to the axe he'd been using, his heart leaping into his throat. She was 10 feet away, close enough to touch, close enough to kill. She held her hands up, palms open, just as she had before. But this time, they were not empty. In her right hand, she held a brace of rabbits, skinned and clean, tied at the hocks with a strip of yucca fiber. "You have no meat," she said. Her voice was as low and calm as he remembered, but it sounded like a cannon shot in the stillness of his world. He stared at the rabbits, then at her. He had been living on weevil-shot flour and coffee for 3 days. The sight of the fresh, pink meat made his stomach twist in hunger. "I don't need your food," he lied, his voice tight. "Yes, you do," she said. It was not an argument. It was a fact. She took 2 steps forward and laid the rabbits on a clean patch of straw by the corral fence. The land provides, we take. He watched her, his suspicion warring with a gratitude so sharp it shamed him. He had been raised to be polite, though life had burned most of it out of him. He found himself unable to meet her eyes. I have nothing to pay you, he muttered, turning back to the recalcitrant post. I did not ask for pay. She watched him struggle with the log for another moment. He strained, his face red, the post sinking deeper into the muck. He was making it worse. He heard her move, and then she was beside him. She did not speak. She simply picked up a flat, heavy rock from the edge of the corral. She walked to the other side of the hole and, with a powerful, economic motion, jammed the rock into the mud, creating a solid base. Then she took the log from his hands. She was not as tall as him, but she moved with a wiry strength, a complete understanding of leverage and balance. She set the log on her new fulcrum, pressed down, and the post groaned and lifted. Thomas stared, stunned into silence. She repositioned the post, straight up, and then looked at him. Shovel, she said. He retrieved the shovel. For the next hour, they worked. He shoveled the thick mud and rocks back into the hole, and she held the post steady, tamping the earth down with her worn boots, her face set in concentration. They did not speak again, not a single word. The only sounds were his ragged breathing, the scrape of the shovel, and the steady, rhythmic packing of the earth. When it was done, the gatepost stood solid and true, straighter than he had ever been able to get it. He leaned on the shovel, breathing hard, sweat running into his eyes. He looked at her. Her hands were caked in his mud. Why? He finally managed to ask. It was the only word he had. The fence is broken, she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. She wiped her hands on her buckskin dress, leaving dark streaks. Then she turned and walked away, not toward the wilderness, but toward the small, smoky fire pit he kept near the cabin. She picked up the rabbits. We will eat, she said. A command, not a request. He followed her, a strange, numb feeling in his chest. He felt like a man walking in a dream, no longer in control of his own home or his own life. She prepared the food with the same efficient grace. She had a knife, a worn, sharp blade she pulled from her boot. He had a small sack of wild onions and some salt, which he offered wordlessly. She nodded, accepting them. She built up his fire, spitted the rabbits, and set them to roast. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, the sun a bloody smear in the west, painting the clouds in shades of purple and orange. The smell of the roasting meat was intoxicating, and it broke down the last of his resistance. He waited until she had pulled the meat from the fire, dividing it onto 2 tin plates, his only 2. She handed one to him. He took it. Their fingers brushed. Her skin was calloused, but warm. He flinched, but did not pull away. They ate in silence for several minutes. The meat was sweet and smoky. Why me? He asked again, his voice low, the food giving him a courage he had not possessed before. Last time, you said what you wanted. It makes no sense. She finished a piece of meat, chewing slowly, her eyes on the flames. I told you, you are alone. That's not a reason. It is the only reason, she said. She looked at him, her gaze direct, and the mask was gone. He saw the full force of the agony she held. They are all gone. Thomas McCrae. She began to speak, and the story unspooled into the growing darkness. A tale of such profound loss, it made his own grief feel small and selfish. She spoke of her band, the Chiricahua, not as warriors, but as families. She spoke of her husband, a man who taught her to track deer, who laughed when she beat him at it. And she spoke of the raid, not by other tribes, but by the white soldiers, the ones from the fort, the ones who were supposed to be making peace. They had come at dawn, with a treaty flag. And then the shooting started. They did not stop, she whispered, her voice going flat, all emotion draining away. They shot the children, they shot the old ones, they shot the horses. She stared into the fire. I was hit, here. She touched her side, just above her hip. I fell into a gully. I lay there for 2 days. In the blood, listening. Listening to what? He asked, his own voice. The silence, she said. When the screaming stopped, there was silence, like yours, the one you live in. She told him she had been with the child, 9 months gone, ready to give birth. The fall into the gully, the wound, the terror. It brought the child forth. In the mud and the blood, she gave birth. A girl? She said. Her voice cracked. Just once. A tiny fissure in a stone wall. She lived 1 hour, long enough to be cold. I had no milk. I had nothing. I held her until she was still. Then I buried her with my hands. Thomas stopped breathing. He felt the old well rising around him. The cold, dark stone. You lost everyone, he murmured. Everyone. She agreed. I lived. The medicine woman who found me, she saved my life. But she said the wound from the soldier's bullet. And the birth, it broke me inside. She said I could not carry another child, not to term. The womb is scarred. It will not hold. Thomas felt a wave of dizziness. Then why? He started, confused. Why do you ask me? If you cannot... Because she is wrong, Nayeli said. And now a fire came into her eyes. A terrible, burning intensity. The spirits are not done with me. My body is strong, but my people, the few that are left, they believed her. They are lost. They are afraid. They see me as a curse. A woman who cannot give life. A woman who failed. She looked down at her hands. A woman who cannot make a future has no place with them. They cast me out, to die, or to find a new way. So you came here, he said, understanding dawning, as terrible as the story itself. I came here, she confirmed. My husband is dead. My child is dead. My people are ghosts. The white men took them from me, but they will not take the blood. Her eyes locked on his. I cannot have a child for them, but I will have a child for me. For the spirits of my grandmothers, I will have a child of my blood, and of the blood of the men who haunt this land. A child who belongs to both, and to neither. A child who will live. My wound. It is a white man's wound. Perhaps a child with white blood will be strong enough to heal it. To stay. Her logic was a thing of desperate, spiritual madness, a tapestry woven from grief, hope, and pure defiance. It was the most terrifying, and the most human thing he had ever heard. He looked away, toward the vast, dark plains. He saw his own reflection in her story. The survivor, the one left behind, the one who lived with ghosts. I can't, he said, his voice breaking. Nayeli, I can't. You don't understand. What do I not understand? And he confessed. The words tumbled out, clumsy and shameful, words he had never spoken aloud. I've never, with a woman, never, not once. I don't know how. I see people, and I freeze. They look at me, the women at the post. They laugh, they whisper. They know. I'm the ghost boy, the one who hid in the well. I'm not a man. Not like that. I'm afraid, he finished, his whole body shaking. The shame washing over him, hot and cold. He expected her to laugh, or to leave, to finally see him as the fraud. The child. She was silent for a long time. The fire crackled, and a distant coyote yipped, a lonely, fractured sound. She reached across the small fire, her hand moving slowly, as if not to startle a wild animal. She did not try to touch his face, or his arm. She touched his hand, the one clenched white-knuckled on his knee. You are afraid, she said softly. I am afraid. You are alone. I am alone. You are a ghost. I am a ghost. I do not see a man or a boy. I see a survivor. I am not asking for a husband. I am not asking for love. I am asking for life. We are both afraid. Let us be afraid together, just for a little while. He stared at their joined hands, his pale and scarred from wire and sun. Hers, darker, smaller, but just as calloused. A crack of thunder, sharp and sudden, split the night. They both jumped. A flash of lightning illuminated the sky, and a moment later, a blast of cold wind hit the cabin, making the fire dance wildly. Another storm. Then came another sound. A high, terrified scream. His buckskin mare. They both ran to the corral. The horse was wild-eyed, rearing against the new-set post, kicking at the rails. She had bolted, and in the dark, she had re-injured herself on a protruding nail he had failed to fix. A long, dark gash was bleeding on her flank. "Hold her!" he yelled over the rising wind. He grabbed the bridle, fighting the terrified animal, his boots slipping in the mud. The horse tossed her head, slamming him against the rail. Nayeli slipped under the rails. She was chanting, a low, rhythmic sound. A song in her own language. She moved toward the horse's head, not with fear, but with absolute calm. She stroked the mare's neck, her voice never wavering, a low, steady drone against the storm. The horse's shivers began to subside. She was still terrified, but she was listening. "The cabin," Thomas said, his voice ragged. "Get the whiskey and the mending kit. By the fireplace." She was gone and back in a flash, her movements fluid in the dark, as the rain began to lash down, cold and hard. They worked. In the frantic, flickering light of the lightning, he held the horse's head, murmuring his own useless, placating words, while Nayeli, her face a mask of concentration, cleaned the wound with his whiskey and, with a steady hand, began to stitch the ragged flesh together. She used the same needle he used to patch his canvas trousers. They finished in a downpour, soaked to the skin, shivering. They guided the mare into the small lean-to, a three-walled shelter against the cabin, and stood there with her, patting her flank, the smell of wet animal, whiskey, and rain filling their lungs. The storm was already passing, moving east. The thunder was a low rumble now. They were both trembling, from the cold, from the adrenaline, from the raw, exposed nerves of the night. He looked at her in the dim gray light. Her hair was plastered to her face. Her dress was soaked, and she was shaking. He did not know what to do. The confession, the story, the horse, it was too much. She looked up at him. She was not the unreadable, masked woman from the ridge. She was just Nayeli, cold, tired, and afraid. "Thomas," she said. It was the first time she had said his name like that. Softly, she reached out and laid her hand on his chest. It was small and cold, but he could feel the warmth of her palm through his wet shirt. It was a simple, gentle touch, a question. He did not pull away. He covered her hand with his own. He was shaking. He looked down at their hands, and then into her eyes. The depth of the sorrow there was still present, but now it was mixed with something else, a raw, trembling vulnerability that mirrored his own. He did not know who moved first. It was not a kiss. It was an embrace, a slow, tentative pulling together. He put his arms around her, his body stiff and awkward, and she pressed her face into his shoulder. He could feel her shivering. Or perhaps it was him. It was a desperate, clumsy holding. Two survivors clinging to a piece of driftwood in a vast, dark sea. The weight of his loneliness, the weight of her grief. It all came together in that one, trembling, silent moment. He led her inside, his hand in hers. The cabin was small, but it was dry. The embers of the fire still glowed. He threw another log on, and it caught, filling the room with a warm, orange light. They stood, dripping on the hard-packed earth floor, saying nothing. The night was a fumbling, awkward, and profoundly tender thing. It was not the violent passion he had read about in the dime novels at the trading post. It was not about desire, not really. It was about connection. It was emotionally raw. It was two people, terrified of being touched, finally, haltingly, allowing it. It was his first fumbling, trembling attempt at being a man, and her first, desperate attempt at feeling like a woman. It was a sacred, painful, and beautiful act of pure, shared vulnerability. When he woke, The sun was just a gray promise in the window. He was on his cot. He was alone. He sat bolt upright, the rough blanket falling away. The panic that gripped him was cold and immediate. She was gone. It had been a dream. The storm, the horse, But she was not gone. She was standing by the door, dressed. She was gathering her few things. The knife, the small pouch, a piece of jerky he had given her. Her back was to him. She was distant, her shoulders set, the mask firmly back in place. She was leaving. The silence of the cabin, the silence he had curated for 15 years, rushed in, and for the first time, it was unbearable. "Don't," he said. His voice was thick with sleep, and with a new, unfamiliar emotion, fear of loss. She paused, her hand on the door latch. "This was not part of the request," she said, her voice flat. "You are ashamed." "No," he said, too quickly. He stood up, not caring that he was half-dressed. "No, I'm not. I'm overwhelmed, terrified, grateful." He did not have the words. "Don't go," he said again, and it was the most honest thing he had ever said. "Just stay a little longer." She was still for a long time, her back to him. He could not see her face. He could not tell what she was thinking. He half expected her to open the door and be gone, to melt back into the landscape, to become a ghost again. Finally, she turned. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were full of a deep, aching exhaustion. "He asked me to stay," she said, but she seemed to be speaking to the room, to the spirits, not to him. She looked at him, a long, measuring gaze. Then she gave a single, small nod. "For now," she said. She took her hand off the latch and walked back to the fireplace. Sitting on the hearthstone, her back to the wall, she began, very methodically, to clean the mud from her knife. The siege was over, but something new and infinitely more dangerous had just begun. The days that followed slipped into a rhythm that Thomas McCrae had never known. For 15 years, his time had been measured only by the sun's arc and the unending list of chores that kept his hands busy and his mind numb. Now, the silence of the ranch was broken, not by noise, but by a presence. Nayeli did not chatter. She moved with the quiet grace of a deer stepping through dry brush. But her existence changed the very air in the cabin. It felt heavier, charged with a tension that was equal parts fear and comfort. She did not leave. The "for now" she had promised stretched into a week. Then, too, she worked. It was the only way she seemed to know how to exist, and it was the only language Thomas spoke fluently. One morning, under a sky bleached white by the heat, they rode out to the northern ridge to check for strays. Thomas rode his buckskin, healed now but skittish, and Nayeli rode a small, shaggy paint pony she had seemingly conjured from the wilderness 2 days prior, a wild thing she had whistled down from the canyons. Thomas halted his horse, squinting at the hard-packed earth. "Tracks end here," he said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "The heifer must have doubled back toward the creek." Nayeli sat motionless on her pony, her eyes scanning the ground not with the focused stare of a hunter, but with a soft, encompassing gaze that seemed to take in the entire landscape at once. She slid from her mount, her moccasins making no sound on the gravel. "The eyes see what the mind expects," she said quietly. She walked 10 paces to the left, toward a patch of scrub oak that looked undisturbed to Thomas. She crouched, hovering her hand over a cluster of rocks. "You look for the hoof. You should look for the story." Thomas dismounted and walked over, his boots crunching loudly. He felt clumsy next to her. "I don't see anything. Here." She pointed to a single blade of grama grass, bent at a sharp angle but not broken. "And here." She touched a small stone that had been overturned, its darker, damp underside exposed to the sun. The heifer did not double back. She was spooked, a cougar. Thomas stiffened, his hand going to the colt on his hip. "Cougar." "It is gone," Nayeli said, standing up. "The kill was made 2 ridges over. I saw buzzards this morning, but your cow ran south into the box canyon. She is thirsty and afraid." Thomas looked at her, humbled. He had lived on this land his whole life, yet she read it like a newspaper while he was still learning the alphabet. "Teach me," he said. The words were out before he could weigh them. She looked at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Then she nodded. For the rest of the afternoon, she did not just find the cow, which was exactly where she predicted, but she showed him the world he had been blind to. She taught him how a disturbed pebble could tell the time of passing by, how much moisture had evaporated from its surface. She showed him how birds fleeing a thicket signaled a predator, and how the wind carried the scent of water long before the creek came into view. In return, the evenings belonged to Thomas. The ranch work did not end at sundown. Tack needed mending. Bridles needed oiling. They sat on the porch as the twilight turned the desert to indigo. Thomas brought out his stitching pony and his awls. "This leather," he said, his voice low, holding up a snapped rein. "It's dried out, brittle. You have to treat it like skin. If you force the needle, it tears." Nayeli watched him, her dark eyes reflecting the lantern light. She had been skeptical at first, her own people's methods of hide tanning being different, but she watched his large, calloused hands work with a delicacy that contradicted his size. "Show me," she said. He handed her the awl. Their fingers brushed, a spark of contact that no longer made him flinch, but still sent a warm current through his blood. He guided her hands, showing her how to punch the hole without stretching the grain, how to pull the waxed thread through with a steady, even tension. "Patience," he murmured, watching her brow furrow in concentration. "The leather remembers the hand that works it. If you are angry, it will be stiff. If you are patient, it will be strong." She looked up at him then, and for a moment, the leather lay forgotten in her lap. "You are a patient man, Thomas McCrae," she said. "To live here alone, to wait for nothing." "I wasn't waiting," he corrected her, looking out at the darkness beyond the porch rail. "I was hiding." The confession hung in the air, heavy and ripe. It was the opening of a door he had kept barred and bolted. "Why?" she asked. It was a simple question, but it demanded a complex answer. Thomas set his tools down. He picked up his coffee tin, turning it in his hands. "The raid," he said. He didn't need to specify which one. "I was 12. I saw them kill my father by the barn. My mother and sister were inside. I ran. I didn't fight. I didn't try to help them. I ran to the dry well and I climbed down." He took a breath, the memory tasting of dust and old terror. "I stayed there for 2 days. I could hear them, the screaming, and then the silence. The silence was worse. I came out, and they were gone. Everyone was gone. I buried them myself." He looked at Nayeli, his eyes wet. "I felt guilty for breathing, for drinking water, for growing up when they stopped. I stayed here because I thought if I left, I was abandoning them again. And I thought—" He paused, looking at her Apache features, the sharp cheekbones, the copper skin. "You thought we would kill you if you left," she finished for him. Her voice was not accusing. It was factual. "I thought you hated me," he admitted. "I thought every native person I saw wanted me dead just for being white. I thought hatred was the only thing between us." Nayeli was silent for a long time. She picked up the awl again, turning the sharp point against her thumb. "Hatred is a fire," she said softly. "It burns hot, but it burns out. What is left is ash. That is what stays." She set the tool down and looked into the night, her gaze drifting thousands of miles away, into the past. "My father was a chief, not a war chief, but a peace chief. He believed the treaties. He believed the blue-coat soldiers when they said the Great Father in Washington wanted us to be brothers." She took a breath, and Thomas saw the hollow pain she carried, a mirror to his own. "Captain Miller." She said the name like a curse word. "He came to our camp under a flag of truce, a white flag. My father walked out to meet him, unarmed. He carried a pipe. He wanted to talk about the hunting grounds, about the fences the settlers were building." Miller smiled. He shook my father's hand. She closed her eyes. He had a pistol hidden in his sash. He shot my father in the face while he was smiling. The soldiers in the trees opened fire. That was the day my world ended. That was the day I learned that a white flag is just a piece of cloth, and a smile is just a baring of teeth. Thomas reached out across the small space between them. He did not know what to do, so he did the only thing he could. He took her hand. It was rough, strong, and cold. "I am sorry," he whispered. The words felt inadequate, tiny pebbles thrown into a canyon of grief. "Do not be sorry," she said, her fingers tightening around him. "We are here. The fire burned us both. Thomas. But we are not ash. Not yet." That night, the physical distance between them in the bed vanished. There was no fumbling, no hesitation. They came together with a desperate, searing intensity, seeking not just pleasure, but a way to obliterate the memories of wells and white flags. Nayeli was fierce, her nails digging into his shoulders, her breath hot against his neck. She did not speak words of love. She did not whisper sweet nothings. She whispered in her own tongue, low, guttural sounds that felt like prayers or curses. Thomas held her as if she were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. He kissed the scar on her side, the mark of the bullet that had taken her first child, an act of worship and sorrow. They fell asleep tangled together, limbs heavy, breath sinking in the quiet dark. But the world outside their fence line was not content to leave them be. 3 days later, the dust cloud on the horizon heralded trouble. Thomas was by the windmill, greasing the gears. When he saw the riders, 2 of them, he recognized the slouch of the hats and the gait of the horses. Silas Vane and his brother, Jubal. They were ranchers from the valley floor, hard men who ran scrub cattle and drank too much rye whiskey at the trading post. They were the kind of men who measured their worth by who they could look down on. Thomas wiped his hands on a rag and walked toward the cabin. "Nayeli," he called out, his voice sharp. She appeared in the doorway, drying a tin plate. She saw his face, then looked past him to the approaching riders. She did not need to be told. She stepped back into the shadows of the cabin, but she did not hide. She stood just inside the door, a spectral figure in the gloom. The Vane brothers rode up to the trough, their horses blowing hard. They didn't dismount. Silas, the older one, leaned over his saddle horn, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust near Thomas's boots. "McCrae," Silas grunted. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with red dust. "Hot day for work." "It's always a hot day," Thomas said, not moving. He kept his hands away from his hips, but his stance was guarded. "What brings you up this far?" "Lost a calf," Jubal piped up. He was younger, with a face that looked like unfinished dough. He was peering past Thomas, toward the cabin. "Thought maybe it wandered up your drawer." "Haven't seen any stray calves," Thomas said. "Just my own." "Is that so?" Silas shifted in his saddle. He looked toward the cabin, squinting. "Heard talk in town. Heard you had company up here. I didn't believe it, though old Tom McCrae was too spooked by his own shadow to entertain." Thomas felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "I keep to myself. Silas, you know that." "I know what I see," Silas said, his gaze fixed on the doorway. "I see a skirt, and I see dark skin." Nayeli stepped forward. She did not come out onto the porch, but she moved enough that the sunlight caught her face. She looked at the men with a gaze of absolute, withering indifference. Silas recoiled slightly, as if he had seen a snake. Then his face twisted into a sneer. "Well, I'll be damned. It's true. You got yourself a squaw. McCrae." "Watch your mouth," Thomas said. The anger flared hot and sudden, surprising him. "Don't you tell me to watch my mouth, boy," Silas growled, his hand dropping near the heavy dragoon pistol on his belt. "You know what these animals did. You know what they did to your own kin. And here you are, bedding one down like she's a decent folk." "She is a decent folk," Thomas said, his voice shaking with rage. "More than you," Jubal laughed, a high, nervous sound. "You've gone loco. Tom, that's what it is. Desert madness. You keep a wolf in the house, you're gonna get bit. And when you do Don't come running to us." Silas leaned down, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You listen to me. Folks in town don't like this. You harbor a savage up here. It puts us all at risk. You get rid of her, or maybe we come back and do it for you. You'll get killed right along with her. You understand? A race traitor ain't no better than an Indian." "Get off my land," Thomas said. He didn't shout. He said it with the flat, final tone of a hammer striking an anvil. Silas stared at him for a long moment, weighing the threat. Then he spat again. "We're going, but you mark my words. This doesn't end well." They turned their horses and rode off, the dust billowing behind them. Thomas watched them go until they were just specks against the heat haze. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He turned to the cabin. Nayeli was standing on the porch now. Her face was pale beneath the copper tone of her skin. "They will come back," she said. It was not a question. "Let them come," Thomas said, though he felt sick. "They will kill you," she said. "To get to me. I have seen it before. Hate spreads like rot." She stepped down from the porch, walking toward him. "I should go. I can go into the mountains. My aunt is there. I can hide." "No," Thomas said. He grabbed her shoulders. "No, you're not going anywhere." "It is safer," she argued, her eyes searching for him. "For you." "I don't care about safety," Thomas said fiercely. "I spent 15 years being safe. I spent 15 years being dead. I'm not going back to that. You stay. We protect each other." She looked at him, and he saw a flicker of something new in her eyes. Not just gratitude, but fear. Fear for him. She nodded slowly. That night, the cabin felt less like a home and more like a fortress. Thomas barred the door with a heavy oak plank he had never used before. He took the Winchester from the wall and cleaned it again, though it was already spotless. He loaded the magazine, the brass cartridges clicking softly into place. When they went to bed, he did not lean the rifle against the wall. He laid it on the floor, right beside the bed, within arm's reach. Sleep was a fitful, shallow thing. Thomas drifted in and out, his mind replaying the sneer on Silas's face, the memory of the raid, the feeling of helplessness. Then, the nightmare came. He was back in the well. The air was cold and smelled of wet stone. Above him, the circle of sky was red, the color of blood. He heard his mother screaming his name. "Thomas! Thomas, help me!" He tried to climb, but the stones were slick with grease. He slipped, falling deeper into the dark. Then, a face appeared at the top of the well. It wasn't a raider. It was Silas Vane, and he was smiling. He dropped a lit torch into the well. Thomas woke with a gasp, his body jerking upright. He was drenched in sweat, his heart racing so fast it hurt. He scrambled for the rifle, his hands shaking. Before he realized where he was, the cabin was dark and quiet. The only sound was the wind. "Thomas?" Nayeli's voice was soft, cutting through the panic. She was sitting up beside him, her hand on his back. He dropped the rifle and turned to her, burying his face in her neck. He wrapped his arms around her with a desperate, crushing force. He needed to know she was real. He needed to know she wasn't Ash. "I'm here," she whispered, stroking his hair. "I am here." He pulled back slightly, looking at her in the moonlight that spilled through the small window. Her face was a study in shadows and silver light. She looked beautiful and terrifyingly fragile. The words built up in his chest, a pressure he could no longer contain. The encounter with the ranchers, the fear of losing her, the intimacy of their days, it all crystallized into a single, undeniable truth. "I don't want a child," he rasped, his voice broken. Nayeli went still. She looked at him, her eyes wide. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying I don't care about the bloodline," he said, gripping her arms. "I don't care about the past. I don't care about what you need from me for your spirits. I want you, just you, Nayeli. I want you to stay because you want to stay, not for a baby. For me." It was a declaration of love, though he didn't use the word. It was a rejection of their transaction and a plea for something real, something permanent. Nayeli stared at him. The moonlight caught the tears welling in her eyes, making them shine like obsidian. She did not smile. She did not kiss him. She looked terrified. She pulled away from him, drawing her knees to her chest. She turned her head toward the window, toward the cold, indifferent moon. "You do not know what you ask," she whispered. "I know exactly what I ask." Thomas said, "I'm done being alone." "It is not about being alone," she said, her voice trembling. She turned back to him, and the pain on her face was so raw it made him flinch. "You want me. You want a future with me. But Thomas, the price." "What price?" "The medicine woman," she said, her voice barely audible. "She told me more than just that I could not carry. She said the damage inside is deep. If I carry a child, if the womb stretches, it will likely tear. The bleeding will not stop." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. You could die?" "It is not a possibility," she said flatly. "It is a likelihood. I knew this when I came to you. I knew the cost, to bring life into this world. I will likely have to trade my own for it." Thomas stared at her, horror washing over him. "And you still asked? You still want to do this?" "I told you," she said, tears finally spilling onto her cheeks. "I am a ghost. My life is already gone. My purpose is to leave something behind, to defeat the death that took my people. If I die to bring a child of our blood into the world, it is a good death. It is a victory." "No," Thomas said, shaking his head violently. "No, that's not victory. That's suicide. I won't do it. I won't help you kill yourself." "You already have," she said softly. She placed her hand on her stomach. "I have missed my moontime. It has already begun." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the mountains, deeper than the well. Thomas looked at her hand on her belly. A life, a death sentence. They were the same thing. He should have been angry. He should have shouted. He should have shaken her for her recklessness, for using him as an instrument of her own destruction. But as he looked at her, this woman who had walked out of the wilderness and sewn his life back together, he felt only a crushing, devastating love, mixed with a dread so cold it froze his marrow. He reached out and covered her hand with his. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the pulse of life beneath it. "We will find a way," he whispered, though he did not know how. "We will fight it, both of us." Nayeli did not argue. She moved into his arms, and he held her. They lay back down under the cold, watching the eye of the desert moon. He held her as if she were made of glass, as if the sheer force of his will could keep her whole. Desire was there. Yes, he loved her body, her spirit, her strength. But now, it was twisted together with a terrible, looming dread. Every beat of her heart was a clock ticking down. Every moment of sweetness was shadowed by the grave. They held each other in the dark, two outcasts on an island of their own making, waiting for the dawn and for the storm that was sure to follow. The dread that settled over the cabin after Nayeli's confession was a physical thing, as thick and suffocating as the summer heat. Thomas had tried to push her words away, to treat them as a phantom, a fear born of old trauma. He told himself her missed moontime was a fluke, a trick of a body starved and stressed. He clung to the simple, desperate plea he had made. "I want you," as if saying it enough would make it the only truth. He did not ask her about it again. He was too afraid of the answer. But Nayeli knew. She had begun to live with the secret in a way he could not. Her body, which she read as clearly as he read a ledger, was betraying her with small, undeniable signs. It began with the food. The smell of the coffee he boiled in the mornings, a scent he loved, now made her turn her head, a green sickness rising in her throat. She would walk away from the cabin, her hand pressed to her mouth, and return minutes later, her face pale and damp. "The air is heavy," she would say, and he would nod, pretending not to notice. Then came the weariness. She, who could work from sunup to sundown without complaint, would now find herself sitting heavily on the porch steps in the middle of the afternoon. her hands idle in her lap. Her breasts were tender, aching in a way that was new. She had felt this before, in that other life, before the raid. She knew the bloom of life, and she knew the terror that came with it. She did not tell Thomas. She watched him. She saw the way he checked the ridgeline, the newfound tension in his shoulders, the rifle that was now his constant companion. He was consumed by the threat from the Vane brothers, by the fear of the outside world. She saw his fear for her, and she could not bring herself to add to it. She could not look at the man who had finally said he wanted her, and tell him that her body had already signed his death warrant, or hers. So she held the knowledge like a hot stone in her gut, a secret that was both a triumph and a tragedy. The outside world did not wait long. Word of McCrae's squaw spread through the valley with the speed of a grass fire. It traveled from the Vane brothers' mouths to the trading post, from the post to the blacksmith, and from the blacksmith to the one-room office of Sheriff Brody. A week after the Vanes' visit, another rider approached. This one was not a slouch-hatted rancher. He wore a tin star on a dusty vest, and he rode with the weary slump of a man who had seen too much trouble and was paid too little to care. Sheriff Brody was a practical man. He did not dismount, but sat his horse, a big roan, and hooked a thumb in his belt. "Thomas," he said, his voice flat. He was chewing tobacco, and his gaze was steady. "Sheriff," Thomas replied, standing on the porch. He held a bucket of feed, his knuckles white. Nayeli was inside, but she was watching from the window, the shadow of her form just visible. "Been hearing stories, son," Brody said. "Stories that make decent folk nervous. Been hearing you're cohabitating. I'm living my life. Sheriff, same as I always have." Brody sighed and spat a stream of brown juice into the dust. "Not the same. Thomas, not by a long shot. You know the treaty. You know the Army's position. Apaches are meant to be on the reservation at San Carlos. Not here, not in your house." "She's not a raider," Thomas said, his voice low and tight. "She's just a woman. She harms no one." "That ain't how people see it," Brody said. "They see a savage. They remember what happened to your own folks, even if you seem to have forgotten. They see a buck-crazy fool putting everyone at risk. Silas Vane is stirring up the boys down at the saloon. He's talking about a necktie party." Thomas's blood went cold. "Silas Vane threatened me on my own land. Are you here to arrest him?" Brody laughed, a short, barking sound. "Arrest him? For what? For being a God-fearing white man who's nervous about Indians? Don't be a fool. I'm not here to arrest him. I'm here to warn you. You're poking a hornet's nest. Thomas, this woman, she's not worth your life. She's not worth the trouble she's bringing to my town." "She is not trouble," Thomas said, his rage making him shake. "She's worth more than this whole damn valley." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "I see. You've really lost your mind. Well, I'm giving you one warning. Get rid of her. Send her back to the reservation where she belongs. If you don't, I can't protect you, and when Vane and his boys ride up here, I'll be looking the other way. I might even sign the warrant for your arrest myself. Harboring a fugitive hostile, that's a federal crime." He pulled on his reins, turning the roan. "You've got 3 days." "Thomas, then I'm washing my hands of you." Thomas watched him go, his heart a cold, hard knot. He turned and went inside. Nayeli was standing by the fireplace, her face carved from stone. "You must let me go," she said. It was not a plea. It was a flat statement. "No," Thomas said. "He is right. They will kill you." "They will have to," Thomas said. He walked to her, putting his hands on her arms. "I am not hiding in a well again. Nayeli. Not ever. We are in this together." She looked at him, her eyes searching for him, and in their depths he saw not just fear, but a dawning, terrible love. She leaned her forehead against his chest for just a moment. "You are a fool, Thomas McCrae," she whispered. "Then we're two fools," he said, holding her. 2 days later, Thomas knew he was running out of time. His supplies were low, but more than that, He knew he couldn't hide in the cabin and wait for the attack. He had to face them. He had to show them he wasn't afraid. It was the only way, the way of a man, not the boy in the well. He hitched his mule to the buckboard. "I'm going to the trading post," he said. Naomi's head snapped up. "No, that is what they want. They will kill you there. I need flour. I need salt. I need cartridges," he said, his voice hard. "I will not starve. I will not be run off. I am a white man, and I have a right to buy supplies. I will show them I am not afraid." "It is not courage," she pleaded, grabbing his arm. "It is pride. It is a mistake." "Stay here," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Bar the door. Keep the rifle. I will be back before sundown." He kissed her. It was a hard, desperate kiss, tasting of fear and resolve. Then he left. The ride to the trading post was 8 miles of simmering tension. Every rock, every stand of saguaro seemed to hide a man with a rifle, but he arrived without incident. The post was run by a man named Elias Thorne, who was more interested in coin than in gossip, but he was not immune to the pressure of his customers. When Thomas walked in, the low murmur of conversation stopped. The 3 men at the counter, Jubal Vane, and 2 other ranchers Thomas knew only by sight, turned as one. Thomas ignored them. He walked to the counter, his list in his hand. "Elias," he said, his voice steady, "I need 20 pounds of flour, 5 pounds of salt, a sack of beans, and 2 boxes of .44, 40 cartridges." Elias Thorne swallowed, his large Adam's apple bobbing. He looked past Thomas at the other men. I'm not sure I can sell you those cartridges, Tom," Elias said, his voice oily with apology. "There's a shortage." "There's 2 boxes right there on the shelf," Thomas said, pointing. "Now, listen here, Thorne." Jubal Vane slurred. Stepping forward, he was not as brave as his brother, but he was bolstered by his friends and the whiskey he'd clearly been drinking. "You ain't gonna sell ammunition to a man who's gonna give it to a savage? He's probably arming a whole war party up there." "That's a lie." "Jubal," Thomas said, not turning. "Is it?" Jubal sneered. "You're a disgrace. McCrae, your PA would be ashamed. Your man rolling in her grave, knowing her son is sleeping with one of the very things that butchered her." Thomas snapped. He did not think. He did not plan. He turned, and his fist, hard from years of swinging an axe, connected with Jubal Vane's jaw. There was a sickening, wet crack, and Jubal went down like a felled tree, unconscious before he hit the floorboards. The other 2 men stared, stunned, then lunged for him. Thomas was not a brawler, but he was strong. He threw one of them into a barrel of pickles, the brine splashing, and kicked the other in the stomach, doubling him over. He stood breathing hard, his fist bloody, his chest heaving. The silence in the store was absolute. Elias Thorne looked at the 3 men on the floor, then at Thomas. His eyes were wide with terror. "The cartridges. Elias," Thomas said, his voice a low growl. Elias, trembling, grabbed the 2 boxes and the rest of the supplies, throwing them into a sack. Thomas threw a handful of coins on the counter. He did not wait for the change. He backed out of the store, grabbed his sack, and untied his mule. He was on the buckboard and moving before the men inside had even begun to stir. The drive home was fast. He knew he had not ended anything. He had just started the war. He burst into the cabin, his face dark with adrenaline and fear. Nayeli was by the window, rifle in hand. She saw his bloody knuckles and the desperate look in his eyes. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I hit Jubal Vane. I hit 2 others. They talked about my mother." Nayeli closed her eyes, the last thin thread of hope she had been holding, that this could be passed over, snapped. "They will come tonight," she said. "Not just Silas, all of them. They have a reason now. A white man's reason." "I know," Thomas said. He went to the window, peering out at the setting sun. The sky was a bloody, awful red. "I know, we can't stay. We can't fight them all. They'll burn us out." He turned to her, the fear finally breaking through his anger. "We have to leave. Tonight. Right now." We can take the horses, head north, into the mountains. You said your aunt was there. We can go there. We can hide." Nayeli looked around the small, mean cabin. It was the only home he had ever known. It was the only home she had known in years. "Yes," she said. "We will go." Thomas began to move, his actions frantic. He grabbed a canvas sack and began stuffing it with what little they had. A skillet, the salt, the new-bought flour, his axe. He was a man possessed, his movements jerky and panicked. "Thomas?" Her voice was quiet, but it cut through his fear. He stopped, his back to her. "What?" he snapped, his voice rough. "You must know. Before we go, you must know what you are running to." He turned. She was standing in the center of the room, her hand on her stomach. The last rays of the sun, coming through the window, set her ablaze, her black hair outlined in red gold. "What are you talking about?" he asked, though he knew. He knew. "That night," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "you said you did not want a child. You said you wanted me. And I told you my fear, that I had missed my moontime. It was a fear," he says. "The stress. It was not a fear," she said. "It was the beginning. I did not tell you. I did not want to add to your burden. I did not want you to hate what was happening." She took a step toward him. "It is not a possibility. Thomas, it is true. I am carrying your child." The words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, sitting heavily on his cot. He stared at her hand on her belly. The sickness he saw her hide, the weariness, it all clicked into place. It was real. The child was real. And the danger to her life, it was real, too. He looked at her, his mind a warring, chaotic storm of emotions. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated wonder. A life, in a place that had only known death. He felt a love for her so fierce it took his breath away. And then he felt a terror so cold and so vast it threatened to swallow him whole. She was going to die. He had helped her. He had planted this beautiful, fatal seed. He didn't realize he was crying until he felt the hot tears on his chapped hands. He made a sound, a choked, broken sob that came from the deepest part of him, from the bottom of the well. It was the sound of a boy's grief and a man's terror, all at once. Nayeli was at his side in an instant, kneeling, putting her arms around him. "This is not a death," she whispered fiercely in his ear, holding his head to her shoulder. "This is life. This is our victory. This is the blood that lives on. Do you hear me? This is our son or our daughter, and they will live. But you," he choked out. We will fight," she said, using his own words against him. "You said it. We will fight. Both of us. All three of us." He held her, his sobs quieting. He looked at her, and in her eyes, he saw not a death sentence, but a future, a terrifying, beautiful, and defiant future. He stood up, pulling her with him. His grief was replaced by a sudden, cold clarity. "The Vanes, the sheriff, they are not just trying to kill you anymore. They are trying to kill our child." "Yes," she said. "They will not succeed," he said. He grabbed the sack. "We leave. Not just for us. For this." He touched her belly, his hand trembling. "We leave in 2 days. I need to gather the cattle. Sell them. Something. We need money. We can't run with nothing." "No, Thomas," she pleaded. "Tonight. They will come tonight." "They won't come tonight," he said, his voice hard with a new, dangerous resolve. "They're cowards. Jubal is hurt. They will drink. They will build their courage. They'll come tomorrow, or the day after. We have 1 day. I'll ride to the Miller Ranch. He's a hard man, but he's fair. He might buy the cattle." "We need money for this to work," Nayeli argued. But his mind was set. It was a foolish, prideful plan. But he felt he had to do it, to provide, to be the man he had never been. They agreed. 2 days. At dawn on the 2nd day, they would be gone. That night, they slept with the rifle between them. their nerves stretched thin. Every gust of wind, every hoot of an owl was the sound of riders. But the night passed, and the next day, Thomas rode out, leaving Nayeli alone, her hand on her belly, the bar on the door. He returned just after dusk, his face grim. Miller had refused to buy. The Vanes had heard the rumors. He wanted no part of it. "It doesn't matter," Thomas said, unsaddling his horse in the dark. "We'll leave with what we have. We'll take the horses. We'll live off the land. You and I, we know how. We'll be gone before the sun is up." They ate a cold, nervous meal of biscuits and jerky. They packed their few belongings into 2 saddlebags. The cabin, which had been his prison and then his sanctuary, was now just a shell. They lay down on the cot, fully dressed, trying to get a few hours of sleep before their journey. The exhaustion of the last few days finally claimed them. They fell into a deep, troubled sleep. It was the smell that woke him. Acrid smoke, thick and oily. He shot up, his lungs filled with fire. The room was not dark. It was lit with a terrible, flickering orange light. "Nayeli!" he screamed. The cabin was burning. Flames were licking up the inside of the door, and the dry thatch of the roof was a roaring inferno. "Thomas!" Her voice was a choked cry. She was on the other side of the room, by the window. He scrambled for the rifle, for the saddlebags. The heat was a living thing, a monster that clawed at his skin. "The window!" he yelled. He grabbed the bags and ran, hunched over to where she was clawing at the small, crude opening. Outside, he could hear them. The whooping and yelling of drunken men. Silas Vane. "Burn, you race traitor! Burn with your squaw!" A gunshot shattered the window, the glass exploding inward. Thomas shoved Nayeli through the opening. She fell out onto the hard-packed earth, coughing, gasping for air. Thomas threw the bags out, then the rifle, and dived after her. Just as the main roof beam collapsed in a shower of sparks and thunder, they lay on the ground, choking, the intense heat scorching their backs. Nayeli was on her hands and knees, clutching her belly, her body racked with deep, agonizing coughs. Thomas grabbed the rifle. He saw them, 4 riders, silhouetted against the blaze, circling the cabin, firing their pistols into the flames. They were laughing. He levered around into the chamber and fired. The shot was deafening. He aimed high, not to kill, but to scatter. "He's out!" one of them screamed, his voice high with panic. Thomas fired again. The laughter stopped. The riders scattered, panicked, disappearing into the darkness, their hoofbeats fading. They had not expected a fight. They had expected to murder 2 people in their sleep. Thomas rushed to Nayeli. She was still coughing, trying to get the smoke from her lungs. "Are you hurt?" he yelled, pulling her up. "Are you hit?" She shook her head, still clutching her stomach, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on the inferno that had been their home. "Everything," she whispered, her voice a raw scrape. "It's all gone." Thomas looked at the fire, the posts he had set, the roof he had patched, the cot they had shared, the walls that held the ghosts of his parents and the ghosts of their own new love. All of it was turning to ash. "No," he said, pulling her into the darkness, away from the light and the heat. He grabbed the saddlebags. "Not everything." He put his arm around her, and she leaned on him, still coughing, still clutching her belly. They had nothing but the horses, the clothes on their backs, and the child. He led her toward the corral, praying the horses were still there, praying the Vane brothers were gone for good. They were homeless, they were hunted, but they were alive, and they were together. The fire was a roaring beast, a greedy, orange god devouring 15 years of silence and 15 days of hope. Thomas dragged Nayeli into the deeper shadows of the corral, his lungs burning, his eyes streaming. The horses, he had to get to the horses. His buckskin and her shaggy paint pony were screaming in terror, rearing against the rails as sparks rained down around them. "Get the bags," he yelled, shoving the rifle at her. "Cover the horses' eyes." He ran to the gate, unlatching it, his back blistering from the heat of the fire. The air was thick with the smell of burning pine, of his life turning to ash, He grabbed the buckskin's bridle, the mare wild-eyed, and Naeli, her face smeared with soot, was there, throwing a blanket over the pony's head. "Mount!" he bellowed. There was no time for grace. He threw Naeli onto her pony and scrambled onto his own, dragging the saddlebags with him. Behind them, the main roof of the cabin collapsed in a volcanic eruption of sparks, lighting the night like a hellish dawn. "Ride!" He kicked the buckskin, and they bolted, charging north, away from the fire, away from the yelling. Drunken cowards who were still firing their pistols into the flames. They did not stop. They rode with the fire at their backs, the only light in a world that had suddenly gone black. They rode until the horses were lathered and gasping, until the glow of their burning home was just a faint, hateful smudge on the southern horizon. They fled into the wild canyons and forests of northern Arizona, climbing from the arid, sun-baked plains into the higher, colder country of the Mongolian Rim. They were no longer ranchers or outcasts. They were fugitives. Life on the run was a brutal reduction to pure survival. They had 2 horses, 1 rifle, 1 axe, and a sack containing 20 pounds of flour and a handful of cartridges. The fire had taken everything else. It had taken his father's tools and her mending kit. It had taken their blankets, their skillet, their past. The first few days were a blur of smoke-filled lungs and aching fear. Naeli's cough was deep and ragged, a tearing sound that worried him more than the thought of Silas Vane's pursuit, and she would double over, clutching her belly, and he would see the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for the child. They moved at night, hiding in creek beds and aspen groves during the day. Thomas hunted, but the single shot of the rifle was a terrifying risk, a beacon to any tracker. He was forced to set snares, and they survived on a handful of stringy rabbits and the bland, gritty paste he made from flour and cold creek water. The nights were freezing. September in the high country was not the gentle autumn of the plains. Frost coated the ground by morning, and they had no blankets. They slept huddled together, their backs against a boulder, the horses tethered close by, all of them sharing the same meager body heat. It was in this crucible of cold and hunger that their bond, forged in grief, was tempered into something unbreakable. They had no one else. They were the only 2 people in a world that wanted them dead. On the 5th day, Naeli stumbled. They were leading the horses down a steep, shale-covered slope. Her legs, weakened by the coughing and the pregnancy, gave out. She went down, not with a cry, but with a quiet, exhausted sigh. Thomas was at her side in an instant, lifting her. She was lighter than he expected, fragile as a bird. "I am fine," she whispered, her pride still intact. "You're not," he said, his voice rough. He looked at her, her face gaunt, her dress torn, and a wave of pure, protective rage washed over him. He was the one who had hesitated. He was the one who had waited 2 days. This was his fault. He lifted her and put her on his own horse. He took the reins and walked beside her, his hand on her knee, as if to steady her. But it was he who drew strength from the contact. As the weeks wore on, the land grew more rugged, and her strength failed. He would lift her from the horse and carry her, his own muscles screaming in protest. The last few yards to their cold, hidden camps. One evening, they stopped by a trickle of a stream, the aspen leaves around them a brilliant, dying yellow. He had built a small, smokeless fire, and they were sharing the last of the flour, baked into a hard, tasteless cake. He was rubbing her feet, his hands rough but gentle, trying to bring some warmth back to them. She watched him, her eyes dark in the twilight. Then, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was not the desperate, clinging kiss of their nights in the cabin. It was a kiss of profound, unutterable tenderness, a kiss of gratitude and acceptance. "You are a good man, Thomas McCrae," she whispered, her hand tracing the line of his jaw, the rough stubble that was now a short beard. "You are not the boy in the well. You are the man who climbs mountains." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "We are alive," he murmured. "That's all that matters." "No," she said softly. "That is not all. You are my man. That is what matters." He held her, and for a while, the cold and the hunger did not exist. Nayeli guided them, her memory a fragile compass. She was leading them to a place she had not seen since she was a small girl, a place her father had told her was sacred, a secret valley in the heart of the mountains. They were ghosts, half-starved, their horses' ribs showing. When they finally found it, it was not a Grand Canyon. It was a crack in a rock wall, a passage so narrow they had to unload the horses and lead them through one by one. Thomas had almost dismissed it as a dead end, but the passage opened up. After 100 yards of darkness, they stepped out into a small, green valley, no more than half a mile wide, that was completely encircled by sheer, towering cliffs of red rock. A stream cut through the center, lined with cottonwoods that were a brilliant gold. The air was still protected and warm. It was a church. "We are here," Nayeli whispered, sliding from her pony. She looked around, her eyes filled with a child's wonder and an adult's sorrow. "Where is your aunt?" Thomas asked, his rifle at the ready. The valley felt safe, but he trusted nothing anymore. "She lives where the water speaks," Nayeli said. They followed the stream to its source, a small waterfall that tumbled from the rocks into a clear, deep pool, and there, tucked under an overhang, almost invisible, was a wickiup, a traditional Apache dwelling of branches and hides. A woman was sitting outside, grinding corn on a metit stone. She was ancient. Her face was a landscape of deep wrinkles, her eyes cloudy with age, her white hair tied back with a leather strip. She did not look up as they approached. She just kept grinding, the stone making a soft, rhythmic sound. Nayeli stopped 10 feet away. She said a word, low and respectful, in her own language, the old woman's hands still. She looked up, her gaze slow, as if pulling back from a great distance. She looked at Nayeli, and her eyes, though clouded, were sharp. She stared for a long, heavy minute. Then, her gaze shifted to Thomas. He stood, tall and white and out of place, his axe in his hand, his face bearded and grim. He felt like an invader, a stain on this pristine place. The old woman's eyes missed nothing. They took in his rifle, his protective stance beside Nayeli, and finally, her belly, which was now a gentle, unmistakable swell beneath her worn dress. The old woman grunted. She spoke, her voice a dry, rattling whisper. Nayeli listened, and her face went pale. She answered, her voice pleading. The old woman spoke again, this time with a note of finality. She pointed a long, bony finger at Thomas. "What?" Thomas asked, stepping closer to Nayeli. "What did she say?" Nayeli turned to him, her eyes brimming with tears. "This is my great-aunt, Tsigotsa, the medicine woman who saved me after the raid. Will she help us?" "She says we can stay," Nayeli said, her voice trembling. "She says the valley is protected by spirits. The soldiers do not come here, but she says the child." "What about the child?" Thomas pressed. "She says he is a child of 2 worlds and will be welcome in neither. He is born of the blood of the conqueror and the blood of the conquered. He will be hunted by the white man as a half-breed, and he will be scorned by our people as a betrayal. She says he will be a child of ghosts, a curse, unless both bloods can find a way to make peace, not with each other. With him." Thomas looked at the old woman. Her face was a grim, impassive mask. He did not need a translation to understand the warning. This was not a sanctuary. It was just a different kind of battlefield. "I don't care," Thomas said, his voice hard. "I don't care about curses or spirits. I care about her." He put his arm around Nayeli. "We are staying." He would not live in the wickiup. He felt the old woman's eyes on him, judging him, and he did not want her pity or her scorn. He was a builder. He would build. He chose a spot on the other side of the stream, under a stand of tall pines. He took his axe, the one thing he had saved, and he began to work. He was a man possessed. He felled small trees, his grunts echoing in the quiet valley. He dragged stones from the creek, his muscles straining, his hands softened by the ride, quickly blistering and then bleeding. He worked from dawn until he could no longer see, fueled by a cold, desperate rage. He was building a home. He was building a fortress. He was building a defiant argument against the old woman's curse. Naili, too weak to help, would sit and watch him, her hands folded over her belly, her face a mixture of love and fear. The old woman would sometimes watch, too, from a distance, her silent, judging presence a spur to his labor. The shelter was small and crude, a lean-to with 3 walls of log and stone, and a roof of pine boughs, but it was theirs. As the shelter took shape, and the first snows of winter began to dust the high peaks above the valley, Naili's health began to fail. The cough returned, and the weary paleness never left her face. She was eating the corn the old woman provided, and the small fish Thomas caught in the stream. But she was fading. The life she was building was taking hers. The fear in the small cabin was a constant, living thing. Thomas would wake in the night to listen to her breathe, his hand resting on her stomach, feeling the faint, fluttering kicks of the child, a life that was so precious and so deadly. Then, one night, the dread became a reality. A cold wind howled over the canyon rim. A mournful sound. Thomas woke to a small, choked gasp. He fumbled for the lantern, his hands shaking. He lit the wick. Naili was lying on her back, her face pale as snow, her eyes wide with a terror that ripped his heart out. She was clutching the rough blankets, her knuckles white. It's happening," she whispered. He looked down. There was a dark, wet stain on the blankets between her legs. "Blood! No!" he breathed. He scrambled out, yelling for the old woman. "Tsigotsa! Help us! Please!" The old woman came, moving with a speed that belied her age. She pushed Thomas aside, her face grim. She examined Naili, chanting low, and then forced a bitter, black tea between her lips. She packed a mixture of moss and herbs against her. The bleeding slowed. It stopped, but the old woman's face was not one of victory. She looked at Thomas, and then at Naili, and said something in Apache, her voice full of a weary sadness. Then she left. "What?" Thomas demanded, kneeling by Naili's side. "What did she say?" "She said, 'The child holds,'" Naili whispered, her voice weak. "For now. But the womb is torn. The anchor for life is weak," she said. "It is a battle the spirits have already decided." "No," Thomas said, his voice flat. "Thomas," Naili said, grabbing his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You must listen. You must go." "I am not leaving this cabin," he said, his voice tight. "Yes, you must. You must save yourself. Look." She gestated to the valley. "It is beautiful, but it is a trap. If they find us, Silas Vane, the soldiers, they will kill you. I am dying. Thomas, I can feel it. I brought this on myself. My pride, my foolish quest. I will not be the cause of your death, too. You are a good man. You deserve to live. Go, now, before the snows trap you here with me. Go!" He stared at her, this woman who had walked out of the wilderness and given him a life, only to tell him to throw it away. He looked at her pale, beautiful, and dying face, and the last of his fear, the last of his hesitation, burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unyielding resolve. He did not shout. He did not argue. He kneeled, taking her cold hands in his. "Leave you?" he said, his voice a raw, broken tear in the silence. "I have left everyone I have ever known. I hid in a well while my mother and father were murdered. I hid on my ranch while the world passed me by. I have been a ghost and a coward my entire life. And you were the first person to see me, the first person to not be afraid of me. You are my home. Naili, this child is my home. I am not leaving you. I am not hiding again." He bent his head, pressing his face to her belly, feeling the hard, round swell of their child. his tears soaking the thin blanket. "You will not die," he whispered, his voice choked with a desperate, furious love. "Do you hear me? You will not leave me. You will not let them win. All those men who burned our home, all those ghosts, they win if you stop. You can't. You have to fight. Not for your ancestors. Not for your damn bloodline. You fight for me. You fight for this. We built this from ash. We made this from ruin. You will not let them have it." He looked up at her, his face a ruin, his eyes blazing. "Fight, Naili, damn you, fight with me." She was weeping, silent, streaming tears that cut paths through the dust on her cheeks. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his face, her thumb brushing away his tears. The stars were brilliant through the small smoke hole in the roof, cold and impossible. "I did not know," she whispered, her voice catching. "I did not know what this was. I came to you as a child, for a purpose. I thought it was the blood I needed. I did not know it was you." She pulled him closer, her eyes locked on his, a universe of pain and love in their depths. "You are my purpose. Thomas McCrae. You are my heart. I love you." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. "I love you." Words she had held back. Words he had been too afraid to say. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, or even of comfort. It was a kiss of desperation, a sacred, binding oath. It tasted of salt and blood and fear, and a love that was more powerful and more terrifying than any of them. He held her, and she held him. The bleeding had stopped. For now. The child was still. For now. The old woman watched them in a silent, sad shadow, outside their tiny, hidden valley. The world was still full of men who wanted them dead, but inside the small, crude cabin, under a sky full of indifferent stars, two people in the small, flickering life they had made, prepared for the birth, they prepared for the winter, and they prepared for war. The first snow fell in early November, dusting the red cliffs of the hidden valley with a powder as fine as sugar. It was a beautiful, deadly sight. With the snow came a silence so profound it seemed to press against the eardrums, muffling the rush of the stream and the wind in the pines. Thomas McCrae moved through this silence with a new urgency. He was no longer the rancher who mended fences and worried about market prices. He had become something older, a creature of the canyon. He wore moccasins sewn by Tsugotsa, the old aunt, and a coat fashioned from the hide of a mule deer he had tracked for 2 days. He spent his hours gathering wood, stacking it in high, dry cords against the stone wall of their lean-to. He knew what winter meant in the high country. It meant isolation. It meant that if the food ran out, they died. If the fire went out, they died. But his primary fear was not the cold. It was the woman inside the shelter. Naili had grown heavy, her movements slow and labored. The bloom of pregnancy was there, but beneath it lay the shadow of the old injury, the scar on her side that pulled tight as her belly swelled. Tsugotsa came every day, her clouded eyes seeing things Thomas could not. She taught Thomas which roots to dig from the frozen earth, blue cohosh for pain, wild yam for the spasms. She showed him how to boil them into bitter teas, her gnarled hands guiding his clumsy ones. "The child is strong," Naili would say, resting her hand on her stomach as they sat by the fire at night. "He kicks like a wild colt." "He?" Thomas asked, whittling a piece of cradle board from smooth pine. "A mother knows," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. But the smile never reached her eyes. They both knew the wager they had made. They were gambling her life for the child's. The labor began on a night when the wind howled down the canyon like a pack of wolves. Thomas was sleeping lightly, his hand on her hip, when he felt her body seize. It was not a gentle awakening. Naili let out a sharp, guttural sound, her back arching off the furs. Thomas was up in an instant, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm. He threw a log on the fire, the sudden flare of light revealing her face. It was a mask of concentration and pain. "Get her!" Naili gasped, gripping his arm hard enough to bruise. "Get Sigotza!" Thomas plunged out into the snow, running the 100 yards to the wickiup without a coat, the cold air burning his lungs. He returned with the old woman, half carrying her through the drifts. What followed was a vigil that stretched into an eternity. The night did not pass in hours, but in waves of agony. The shelter became a world unto itself, smelling of wood smoke, sweat, and copper. It was brutal. There was no romance in it, no soft focus. It was a physical battle, a war between the life trying to enter the world and the body that was too scarred to let it pass. Nayeli fought. She did not scream often, but her low, animal moans tore at Thomas's soul. He knelt at her head, wiping her face with a damp cloth, whispering words that felt woefully inadequate. "I am here," he said, over and over. "I have you. You are not alone." Sigotza was a general in this war. She worked with grim efficiency, her hands slick with oil, kneading Nayeli's belly, checking the progress, her face growing more grave with every hour. By the time the gray light of dawn began to bleed through the smoke hole, Nayeli was fading. Her skin was the color of old parchment, clammy and cold. She had stopped moaning. She lay limp, her breath coming in shallow, rattling gasps. The old woman looked at Thomas and shook her head. She spoke a few words in Apache, her voice flat. Thomas did not need to know the language to understand. "She is not strong enough. The passage is not opening." "No," Thomas growled. He leaned over Nayeli, grabbing her shoulders. "Nayeli, look at me." Her eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused. She looked at him as if from a great distance, from the other side of a wide river. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle. "Save the child. Cut me." She was asking him to take the knife, to save the baby and let her go. "No!" Thomas wept, the tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. He pressed his forehead against hers. "We fight. You promised me. You fight." He pulled her up, supporting her back with his chest, forcing her into a sitting position, using his own strength to hold her upright. "Push," he commanded her, his voice breaking. "Push against me. Give me the pain. I will take it. Just push." Something in his voice, some transfer of sheer, desperate will, reached her. Nayeli let out a cry that was not of pain, but of defiance, a raw, primal scream that silenced the wind outside. She gripped his arms, her nails digging in, and she summoned a strength that should not have existed. The old woman moved quickly. There was a moment of absolute, terrifying suspension. The world stopped. Thomas stopped breathing. Nayeli went limp against him, her head lolling back onto his shoulder. And then, a sound. It was small at first, a wet, gurgling cough. Then, a cry, high, thin, and angry. A cry that pierced the silence of the valley. A cry of life claiming its place in the cold air. "A son," the old woman said in English, her voice cracking. "A son." Thomas looked down. In the old woman's hands, slick with blood and life, was a small, writhing creature. Dark hair, red skin, and a pair of lungs that were already protesting the indignity of the world. Thomas wept. He did not try to hide it. Great. Racking sobs shook his large frame. He held Nayeli tight, terrified to let her go. Terrified she was already gone. "Nayeli," he choked out. "Nayeli, look, look." She did not move for a long moment. Then, slowly, her eyes opened. She looked down at the bundle the old woman was wrapping in a soft deerskin. A faint, ghostly smile touched her lips. "He is loud," she whispered. She was alive, weak, battered, and pale as the snow outside, but alive. The days that followed were a haze of exhaustion and wonder. They named the boy Hani, a word Nayeli said meant fire in an old dialect, for he had been born of the burning of their home and the fire of their will. Thomas did not sleep. He watched them. He watched Nayeli nurse the child, her face gaunt but filled with a fierce, consuming love. He watched the rise and fall of the boy's chest. He kept the fire roaring. He felt a peace he had never known. A sense of completion that healed the 12-year-old boy in the well, but the world outside had not forgotten them. 10 days after the birth, the snow stopped. The sky cleared to a brilliant, hard blue. Thomas was outside, splitting wood, the axe rising and falling with a rhythmic thud. The air was crisp. He stopped mid-swing. The sound was faint, carried on the thin air, the clink of metal on stone, the snort of a horse. He lowered the axe slowly. He looked toward the narrow fissure that served as the entrance to the valley. Riders. They emerged from the shadow of the canyon wall. Single file, dark silhouettes against the red rock. 1, 2, 3, 4 men. They wore heavy coats and wide-brimmed hats. Sunlight glinted off the rifles resting across their saddles. Thomas did not panic. A cold, deadly calm settled over him. He walked to the shelter and grabbed his Winchester. "Thomas," Nayeli's voice came from inside, weak and alarmed. "Stay inside," he said quietly. "Do not come out. Cover the boy." He walked to the center of the clearing, placing himself between the riders and his family. He stood tall, his feet planted wide, the rifle held across his chest. He did not raise it, but he was ready. The riders approached slowly. They saw the shelter. They saw the man standing guard. They fanned out, forming a rough semicircle 20 yards away. The leader rode a large bay horse. He lifted his head, revealing the scarred, bearded face of Silas Vane. Silas looked older, harder. His eyes scanned the valley, taking in the beauty, the isolation, and finally, the man standing in his way. "Found you," Silas said. His voice was rough, like gravel sliding down a chute. "It took us a month, but snow leaves tracks. McCrae, even in the rocks." "Go back, Silas," Thomas said. His voice did not waver. "There is nothing for you here. There's justice here." Silas spat. He shifted in his saddle, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "You shot at white men. You burned your own place to hide a savage. You defied the law." "I defended my home," Thomas said, "and I am defending it now." "That ain't a home," one of the other men called out. "It's a hole, and you're just a dog guarding a bone." Silas chuckled darkly. "We ain't here to talk, Thomas. We're here to finish it. The sheriff said he washed his hands. That means it's open season." He raised his chin. "Send her out. Maybe we let you walk away. Maybe." Thomas thumbed back the hammer of the Winchester. The click was loud in the silence. "You want her," Thomas said. "You go through me, and I promise you, Silas, you'll be the first to die." The tension stretched tight. A bowstring ready to snap. Hands hovered over pistols. Rifles were leveled. Violence was a breath away. Then, the flap of the wickiup across the stream pushed open. Tigotza stepped out. She did not look frail now. She wore a blanket of intricate weave, wrapped around her shoulders like a royal robe. She carried a staff of twisted junipers. She walked toward the stream, toward the men, with a slow, terrifying deliberation. The riders' horses shifted nervously, sensing something their riders did not. "What's this?" Silas sneered, though his voice faltered slightly. "Another witch?" The old woman stopped at the edge of the water. She raised her staff and pointed it at Silas. She did not speak English. She spoke in the tongue of the land, her voice shrill and powerful, echoing off the canyon walls. It was a chant, a curse, a proclamation. "She says you are standing on sacred ground," Thomas translated, his eyes never leaving Silas. "She says the spirits of the mountain are watching you. She says you are hollow men, chasing ghosts because you are afraid of your own shadows." Silas's face reddened. "I don't care what the old hag says. I'll shoot her too." He raised his pistol. At that moment, a cry broke the air. It came from the shelter behind Thomas, a high, thin wail, the cry of a newborn, hungry and cold. The sound hung in the air, impossible to ignore. It cut through the hate and the posturing. It was the sound of pure, unblemished life. The riders froze. Silas lowered his pistol an inch, his brow furrowed in confusion. "A baby," one of the men whispered. "There's a baby." Nayeli stepped out of the shelter. She was wrapped in a blanket, leaning heavily against the doorframe, her face pale but fierce. In her arms, she held the bundle. She did not hide. She stepped into the sunlight. She looked at the men who had burned her home, men who wanted her dead, and she lifted the child slightly, showing him to them. "This is my son," she said, her English clear and ringing. "He is of my blood, and he is of the blood of Thomas McCrae. He is from the West. Kill us, and you kill the future." The silence that followed was heavy. The men looked at the child. They looked at the white rancher standing ready to die for an Apache woman. They looked at the old matriarch invoking the wrath of the earth. Something broke. It was not Silas. It was Jubal Vane, Silas's younger brother, the one whose jaw Thomas had broken months ago. He sat on his horse, staring at the baby. He looked at the tiny hand waving from the deerskin. Slowly, Jubal lowered his rifle. He uncocked it. "I ain't doing this. Silas," he muttered. "What?" Silas turned on him, furious. "Shut your mouth, Jubal." "I said I ain't doing it," Jubal said louder. "We came for a fight. We came for, I don't know what, but that's a baby. A white man's baby, too, by the looks of it. I ain't killing a baby, and I ain't killing a mother." He turned his horse. "I'm done. You coward," Silas screamed. "Call it what you want," Jubal said, not looking back. "I'm going home." He rode toward the canyon entrance. The other two men looked at each other. They looked at Silas, then at the baby. The spell of violence, the mob mentality that had brought them here, had been shattered by the cry of a child. Shame, cold and sobering, took its place. One by one, they lowered their guns. They turned their horses and followed Jubal. Silas Vane sat alone. He stared at Thomas. His face was a mask of impotent rage. He wanted to fire. He wanted to destroy it. But he was alone. The valley, the old woman, the child, they were too much for one man to fight. He spat on the ground. "You're a dead man. McCrae," he whispered. "You just don't know it yet." "I've been dead for 15 years. Silas," Thomas said, lowering his rifle. "I just woke up." Silas wheeled his horse around and galloped after his men. The sound of their hooves faded, leaving the valley to the wind and the stream. Thomas dropped the rifle in the snow. His legs felt like water. He turned and ran to Nayeli, wrapping his arms around her and the child, burying his face in the blanket. They stood there, a tripod of humanity, while the old woman watched from across the stream, nodding once before turning back to her wickiup. The years that followed were not easy. The winters were harsh and the summers were dry. They never returned to the ranch on the plains. That life was ash. They stayed in the valley, the hidden heart of the territory. Thomas built a cabin of stone and heavy timber, one that would not burn. He planted corn and squash in the rich soil by the stream. He hunted the high ridges. Nayeli taught him the language of the land, and he taught her the language of books he ordered from the distant east. Hani grew. He was a boy of two worlds, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's copper skin. He learned to track elk before he could read, and he learned to recite poetry before he could ride. He was not cursed. As the old tales warned, he was a bridge. Sometimes, travelers would find the valley, prospectors, lost cowboys, wandering Apaches. They found a strange family living there. They found a white man who moved like a ghost and an Apache woman who looked at him with a love that defied every law of the territory. They did not preach, they did not fight, they simply lived. One evening, 5 years later, Thomas and Nayeli sat on the porch of their stone cabin. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls on fire. Hani was playing by the stream, skipping stones with the old woman, who was laughing, a dry, rattling sound. Thomas reached out and took Nayeli's hand. It was rough, scarred, and beautiful. "We made it," he said softly. Nayeli looked at him. The hollow pain that had lived in her eyes when they first met was gone, filled by the reflection of the boy by the stream. "We did not just make it, Thomas," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "We made a new world." They watched their son, the child of war and peace, of loss and hope. He was the answer to the silence. He was the defiant, living proof that love, even in the harshest soil, could put down roots that no fire could ever burn away. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust and the heartache of the old frontier, and I hope it resonated with you. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below sharing your location. If you enjoyed this tale of Thomas and Naomi, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories of love, survival, and the untamed American spirit. I look forward to reading your thoughts in English in the comments section.